Thanks for having me. Can I first say, I don't know if they're still in the room, but I really enjoyed that last panel. I think some of the stuff Esther was saying about gender roles and responsibilities and how clearly if we don't teach young boys to be men, how are they ever going to understand? Why do we end up with so many confused young men who end up with mental health problems, committed suicide? It's not a surprise when we tell them that being a man is a bad thing. So I just thought that was great and appreciate that conversation. Look, thanks for having me for this conversation. I understand so far today you've had Nigel Farage tell you to leave the Conservative Party, Steve Baker to tell you please stay in the Conservative Party. I'm going to try and help me fix the Conservative Party, and we'll see if we can get anywhere with that. But it's good to see, as ever at these things, that kind of all is not lost, right? The rumours that universities are just churning out nothing but left-wing activists aren't true. There are some freedom fighters in the world, and here they are all gathered in one place. So look, it's great, and thanks for engaging with it. Thanks for having the courage of your convictions, right? Because believing in some of those old-fashioned things that people don't really care about anymore, like, freedom, choice, patriotism, the rule of law, the small stuff, is really important. And I'm glad that you guys, as I say, have the courage of your convictions. The Conservatives won seats in 2019 on that message, right? Delivered by a very charismatic messenger at the time. But that campaign was tough on crime. It was pro-growth and enterprise. It was patriotic. It was a proper Conservative message. And that message, at the end of the day, is what Darren referred to, that kind of smashed down the red wall. If we go back to a Social Democrat kind of path of least resistance, which is where we risk ending up, then that's exactly what will build that wall back up again. That's how we will end up right back where we started. People in those areas felt for the first time, post-referendum, that they had a voice, that their voice and their vote could change things, and that they'd been taken for granted for a long time, right? And they were right. They'd been voiceless for a long time. Some of those messages, the referendum, delivering Brexit, Boris, all of that stuff started to give them some hope. And when I talk about that path of least resistance, that's the following the popular opinion, right? That is the opinion of mainstream media, of those people with the most Twitter followers, of acting to avoid the negative headlines in the Mirror rather than doing what's right. And those views and those voices are loud. They're the loudest voices that we've got, but they're also the minority. And that path of least resistance is the path of ignoring working class communities. It's a path of political correctness. It's a path, in many seats like mine, of electoral suicide. And the sooner we figure that out, the better. I was elected in Mansfield in 2017, actually one of just 5 pre-Brexit, pre-Boris seats that we managed to win. If you can name the other 4 at the end, then 10 points for you. Difficult election, right? If you remember, Theresa May did her very best to piss a 20-point lead up the wall. We managed to hold on in Mansfield. Much of that was my personal charm and charisma, of course, but some people talked about things like Corbyn and Brexit as other factors that may have been a part of it. They were factors, but they weren't the factors, right? Those people weren't quite right. It was a sense of hope and a sense that somebody might actually be listening to what we were saying and what those communities were saying, that swung things and changed things. The idea that they might have a voice and they might have a power in all of this after that referendum. It didn't happen overnight. The trend goes back to 1997. It goes back to places like Mansfield that have never, ever been Conservative before. Actually, there were 18,000 majorities then, and it went 18, 11, 8, 6, 5, and then Conservative in successive elections over a 20-year period. It's not new. And that trend long predates Corbyn, it predates Brexit, and it's not gone away now that those things perhaps are perceived to have gone away. They are symptoms of a wider shift. They're symptoms of a long-term change and phenomenon, not the catalyst of it. I've no doubt those things accelerated that change. But the trend was already there. As I've said, it was a trend of kind of empowerment and choice, right? A cry to help, for some extent, in some of those communities, and a hope for change. Not a change of political party per se, but for something that might put those communities on the map, right? That might put them first, might give them a voice, and Brexit is the prime example and symptom of that call for change, in my view. And if you look back to the kind of 80s and 90s, the decline of industry, that meant the decline of trade union power, right? And that grip over those communities. All of those, blokes, mainly in my constituency, would have worked in pits. The women would have worked in factories, and they would have paid their subscriptions to the NUM and the Labour Party. And the end of those industries meant the end of that that lifestyle, right? That notion that we are Labour round here, which I still heard on doorsteps in 2017. We're all Labour, Mansfield's Labour, to one where actually there was a sense of choice and a sense of freedom to do something different. I genuinely like to think, and I hope it's not just my own ego, that we played some part in that, along with my predecessor, actually, taking that area and those voters for granted for generations, taking those Labour kind of genetics for granted. When he first heard that I was going to stand, that the Conservative parties were going to put some actual effort into a seat like Mansfield, he said, all you will do is remind people of what Thatcher did and the pits. And that I pointed out pretty quickly that all happened before I was born, and he might want to move on. And I think people got fed up of looking back and that constant negativity and that feeling forgotten, like all we can do is moan about what we haven't got, when actually we want to look to the future. I don't care about what happened in the 80s anymore. I wasn't there, and the world needs to move on. I heard all the way through that election, my granddad would turn in his grave if he knew I was voting Conservative. I heard people would whisper and go, don't tell anyone, I'm going to vote for you. And I would point out that they were the 7th person on that street to do that exact same thing, and maybe they should spend more time with their neighbours, because they weren't alone in that sense, even though everybody's Labour around here. And in 2019, they all did do the same thing, because it was then and is now a 16,500 Conservative majority. So the message got through in the end. I'd like to think, as I say, that perhaps our team had some hand in that in 2017 because we managed to get over the line where nobody else did. I think that contrast, actually, between my 70-something-year-old predecessor who'd been an MP for longer than I'd been alive and the fact that he no longer appeared in the constituents anywhere to talk to anybody, and the message that we tried to put across about how we can look forward, how we can be positive, and how Mansfield can be part of that national political picture was perhaps a contrast that helps us to get it done. But how do you keep those seats? That's what I've been asked to talk about today. I'll give you that background, I suppose. But there are lots of choices on the horizon, things that are coming up, autumn statement very soon in Parliament, where we've got to make choices. If people found themselves free as Labour's grip loosened over those communities, they found some hope that their voice could be heard and make a difference through Brexit. They took a leap of faith. They voted Conservative off the back of fear of Corbyn, perhaps, or love of Boris, perhaps. For levelling up, they took a leap of faith, and we have to repay that faith in the decisions that we make over the next few months and years. The Rishi's recommitted government to the 2019 manifesto. That's good, because that manifesto and that campaign was a winning one, right? We did pretty bloody well in 2019, and we have promised that we will invest in those communities that were left behind, invest in those places that had the least. We sure as hell better do it between now and then. I know there's a lot going on. Darren pointed out I'm a council leader as well, so I'm actively involved locally in levelling up funds, in new train lines, road improvements, job creation opportunities, passing more powers out of Whitehall and down to the communities that I represent. All of that's good. It's long-term stuff, right? And arguably the biggest changes in those communities, investing and changing education and skills, they're generational. We're not going to do it by 2024. But what we need to do then in the meantime is to prove that it's happening. We need to deliver the quick wins. We need to deliver those bricks and mortar things, the capital projects that people can see, so that when we say, look, lots is going on behind the scenes, they believe us because they can see the change. They can see that thing you've delivered, that new building, that new railway line, and it feels real because we have to have the trust to be able to deliver the long-term stuff. Most importantly, though, we've got to keep listening to those voices. The reason that they voted for us in the first place is because we listened. Working class communities, industrial heartlands, what used to be Labour heartlands, voted because we at least tried to do the things that they told us they wanted to see. And if they vote for somebody else, if we stop listening, it's the most volatile electorate we've had probably ever. And they will change their minds. If we revert back to making policy around Chelsea dinner tables or bowing down to Twitter's version of what British culture should be, we will lose red wall communities. And if we're led by what celebrities tell us is right, rather than by the majority, then we will absolutely fail. Because contrary to a lot of popular belief, most former Labour voters in working class seats aren't socialists. They never have been. They were scared to death of a Corbyn-led government. There's an argument that perhaps you can make about being economically slightly centre-left. If you don't have to take the tough financial decisions about what you spend things on and how you balance the budget, then of course we're all slightly economically centre-left because we all want a bit more money, don't we? It's dead easy in that circumstance. But largely they're very culturally right of centre. They're very small C conservative in their outlook. They want government to give them the tools that they need to do well and to succeed and then butt out and let them get on with it. For the most part, They don't want to reward people who don't do things for themselves. They're firm believers in personal responsibility. They don't want politics or government anywhere near their lives for the most part. And they just want enough to support their family, to go on a nice holiday, and largely to be left alone. And I think that's what most people want, actually. They have a strong sense of fairness in those communities. And we have to respect the views of that majority, not of the loudest peoples. To me, that means considering that fairness. And I don't mean the kind of metropolitan progressive virtue signalling fairness, but meritocratic fairness, where you work hard and you get the benefit that you deserve. It's not fair that, for example, we've been talking about it this week and all hell has broken loose. It's not fair that people can arrive on our shores illegally and get housing and food and bills paid and stay at the taxpayer's expense when the taxpayer, the UK citizen, is grafting and paying tax and doing the right thing, but can't get a house, can't pay the bills, can't even get to see their GP within a month or get access to those basic services. It's not fair. It's not fair that when money is siphoned away from those services to pay for people with no legal right to be here, it's not fair we've got hundreds of thousands of people on housing waiting lists when we are buying up flats and hotels for illegal economic migrants. Small boats is not fair. That's fundamentally the case. And you know what? You'll struggle to find anybody in my constituency who disagrees with that, actually. But you wouldn't know that from the way that it's discussed down here. It wouldn't be fair, and I talked about decisions that are coming up in the next few weeks, it wouldn't be fair to ask the public to suck up reducing public services, cutting council budgets that will mean fewer youth centres, fewer family hubs, fewer local buses, at the same time as asking the public to increase foreign aid back to 0.7% and send millions more abroad. The government's first priority has to be to UK citizens, and that's the minimum expectation. It wouldn't be fair when hard-working, low-paid people have had maybe a 2-3% pay rise, if anything at all, because we're always guilty nationally of looking at the average. Most people in the private sector have probably had nothing, actually, to whack unemployment benefits up by 10%. By inflation. Doing so, actually, a 10% rise in the benefits cap, for example, would mean 40% of working people in my constituency earned less than they could get if they were unemployed. And that is fundamentally wrong. It's not fair. And it disincentivises work, it disincentivises enterprise. It would decimate low-paid sectors like care that were already in a mess. But it sounds very nice, doesn't it, to whack benefits up by 10%. It sounds very virtuous. And I sometimes fear that we're going to find ourselves in that virtue signalling cycle instead of doing what is fair. These are major decisions that are coming down the track, right? The prevailing view in the media will be that everything I've just said is wrong, but it is the view of the silent majority, and it's the view of most of my constituents. I had a big fallout with Newsnight last week on foreign aid, because they couldn't understand that just because Labour and the Conservative Party ministers both appeared to agree that increasing foreign aid was the right thing and was a good thing, doesn't mean that they can state it as a fact that it is a good thing and just put it across as if there is no alternative balancing view. They managed to do 4 minutes on why it was awful that we'd reduced it to 0.5%, and then my balancing bit was 10 seconds of me going, oh, but what about other people? And that was it, and they thought that was a fair and balanced conversation. I actually had a blue-collar Conservatives event in Mansfield with Esther McVeigh prior to that 2019 election, where we asked my constituents about foreign aid, and Esther said, I would reduce it by half, and she got booed. I was shocked. I had no idea why they wouldn't. I'd assumed they would all have applauded that, but they said, no, don't reduce it by half, get rid of it altogether. And that's the, whether rightly or wrongly, that's a strong and prevailing view in my constituency, because ultimately, as I said, the UK government should put UK citizens at the foremost of its thoughts and the things that it tries to achieve. And certainly in places like Mansfield, people don't feel that way. But that's what we're up against, right? That Newsnight story, that policy by consensus, the consensus of the bubble, though, right? The consensus that ignores the view of working class communities, hard-working people who were, at the end of the day, were our core vote as a Conservative Party in 2019. If we're going to keep winning the red wall, if we're going to keep winning seats like mine, we have to take decisions for those people and for those places. They might be decisions that will lead to the Daily Mirror saying we're horrible. But actually, nobody in Mansfield reads the Daily Mirror, so let's not worry about it, right? My task, and you guys have touched on it in previous conversations, Esther said earlier on, there's no such thing as a Conservative Party in this country. That hurts me, right? Cuts me deep. But my task and the task of colleagues from some of these seats, and there are more of them after 2019, they do exist, they're new. And the challenge is that because they're new, they're not in the positions of power within the Conservative Party, right? It takes time to move up the ladder, but they do exist. And I hope that we collectively can make that case to government. I hope that organisations like Reasoned and others, and some of the speakers that have been talking today, can help us to do that, because it's fundamental to the existence of a party that I can believe in and that we can believe in, to take that forward and to win the next election as well, because we're not going to win it without those red wall seats and without those principles that we've all talked about over the course of today. So do help, right? As Steve probably said earlier, please don't go. Please help us to try and fix it and keep making those arguments, keep making those voices heard, because things like this and events like this and people like you are absolutely fundamental to that. Thank you very much for having me.